We go out to dinner every few months and just have one of these sort of conversations, like what's not working, what isn't
Right.
working, we haven't been able to talk about at length. And I think that's always just incredibly helpful to feel like we're a team instead of somehow battling each other or trying to outdo each other, or, all the things you hear that I
Oh,
think sadly people bring into their marriage because they have these sort of false expectations about what, family life is supposed to look like.
yeah, exactly. And I wanted to ask you, I thought you would be a good person because I even struggle with this question myself, and because of your background, what is what is healthy and let's say obedience? Those
Oh,
two words, those two like it's
yeah.
like
Like, can we even say those words out loud? I know
yeah,
it just hurts, doesn't it?
exactly.
Yeah,
Well,
right. Yeah.
dishonesty, disrespectful, discrimination, detached, dismissive. That's it. I'm done. Relationships can be messy. Are you having trouble with your personal or professional relationship? Not to worry. As a relationship therapist and coach for over 25 years, I have a lot to share. And so will my guest experts. Let's get smarter in our business and personal lives so we can be our best selves. Now, let's get on with the show. Hello, welcome back to the Luella Young Show. Today I have with me Carrie Gress, a PhD. She's also a fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center in Washington, D.C., and a scholar at the Institute of Human Ecology at the Catholic University of America. She's a philosopher by training and a mother of five. And Carrie brings both intellectual rigor and lived experience to her work, which is really why I wanted to get her on. She's doing it all. She's also the editor of a popular women's online magazine called Theology of the Home, which is a wonderful title, where she explores the beauty, dignity, and spiritual calling of womanhood. Passionate about restoring a true understanding of femininity, she challenges the assumptions of modern feminism and offers a life-giving alternative rooted in faith, tradition, and truth. So I just explained my dream job. Like, so I'm very envious of you, Carrie. Like, how did you fall into all this? I mean,
Um,
obviously when you're 18, you weren't like, I'm going to be an editor of a magazine. I'm going to
yeah.
be a
No, none
philosopher.
of
And
that. Not
no.
even when I was 38. Yeah. No, it's been really a long journey. I knew I really was committed to this idea of kind of getting to truth. I was raised in Oregon, very liberal town. Eugene, Oregon is just incredibly
Mm,
liberal. And I think I just had the experience of feeling like I just wasn't getting the truth anywhere. And my father passed away when I was a teenager, and so I was even more committed to, like, I was dealing with big questions, death and
yeah.
whatnot. And I'd gone to Catholic schools, and I don't think that they formed me well at all. And I just felt
Mm.
like, okay, now the real education starts. I started studying history, and then actually shifted to intellectual history because I thought this is really just fascinating to see how history and the history of ideas are so intermingled and intertwined. And so that was really just the thread I started tugging on was not only that, but I thought, I really want my kids to be better educated than I was as
Yeah.
well. So that was another piece that really felt important, even though I wasn't married. I didn't get married until I was about 35. But all of that I just kept going deeper and deeper and deeper and finding areas of things that I was interested in, and ultimately did a PhD. And that was certainly a challenge because I finished it when I was having babies. And I kept hearing the more you have, the least likely, the less chance you have of actually finishing it. So I worked on it in labor and delivery with one of my kids. And it was really like, I've got to get this done. So I finished it, and it was definitely a challenge. Like, even things, I remember going to the library with one of my infants, and they
Yeah.
were redoing the library. So the elevators weren't working. So I had to actually leave my baby with the librarian while she was asleep so I could go up to the stacks and get books, because it was like the fourth floor, really narrow stairwells, just tiny, tiny stairwells that I couldn't
Jeez.
carry a baby and book. So anyway, yeah, I just kept digging. So anyway, that's and I actually had no interest in dealing with women's issues at all. And in fact, I think I said out loud in my kitchen once, I will never work on women's issues. But they kind of like came up out of the blue, and now I seem to be making my name talking about women's issues. But part of the reason I didn't want to do women's issues was I felt like it was terribly academic, incredibly just obscure, really hard to just communicate to friends and family. Because I wanted to share, at the same time, I was also really growing in my faith. I wanted to share what I had discovered and, all the beauty, you've got 2000 years of Christianity. There's really a lot there to offer. And I think that people weren't getting that. So I was trying to figure out how do we explain these things in ways that are beautiful and compelling. And I just wasn't finding it. And so that's
Yeah.
really where my work with Theology of Home came from. We have these gorgeous coffee table books styles that the books are lavishly illustrated, but they also have a lot of really rich content in them that just gives us a lot to think about, in the home. Why do we want our home to be a sanctuary?
Yeah.
So that was the kind of the fluffy side, but then on more intellectual side, I just started digging into feminism. Was like, there's a lot of problems here that nobody's talking about, and that was kind of um, that just a whole journey that I never expected to be on. And the more I dig, the worse it gets. I'm on
Wow.
year 10 now, and it feels like there's just more and more and more to find. And the deeper I dig, kind of the uglier things get in terms of what we're really doing to ourselves as women and also the culture.
Yeah, no, that's like you say, no, it wasn't straightforward at all. And it kind of reminded when you were talking about the home as a sanctuary, it's just so true. Like I mean, like Gretchen Rubin, are you familiar with her as an author? She has a book called Outer Order, Inner Calm. And it's so true. It's sort of like my office needs to be a certain way when I'm working at it. My home needs to be like if I know a bunch of dishes are piled up in the kitchen, I don't think I'd be able to sit down at my desk sort of thing. Like, but it needs to bring peace and just in the aesthetics alone, but also in the family unit, right? I mean, the number one complaint I would say that I get from women coming to my office, they all say the same thing. If I would ask them one question, what do you want? Like they
Mm.
literally put their hands on their head and they just go, I just want peace. I just want peace,
So interesting.
And it's just like it's such a common yearning, like
Mhm.
especially for a woman. And I mean, that's not just by happenstance. I mean, that's, it's part of our biology, I feel. We're it's strange too. Maybe you can speak on this a little bit. Like, I see something else in women that I don't see as fierce in men, and that's this need for justice. And
It's such an interesting point.
think it's because I wonder if it's sort of like the mama bear in us. You know how we would die. I mean, a man would die for their child as well, but like even like a child seeing your child bullied on a playground as you drive away from the school or something. I mean, you would get out of that vehicle and you would run to that and throw that other child off or whatever, right? Like so we're like
Where does that come from? Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. And you've hit, I think, upon something really important, that mama bear fierceness that we experience. But the other thing that I've discovered is just how much our emotions have been toyed with since really the 1890s. The
mm,
socialists first realized that they could manipulate women's emotions, and women would then become kind of their foot soldiers for their movement. And this got passed on to the Soviets. The Soviets figured this out. This is actually why we have the International Day of Women, because they were trying to manipulate our emotions and to give us the sense that we needed to be involved politically. But there was also even this they called it the gospel of discontent. They wanted women to feel discontent about their lives. And that was how they captured our emotions. So if you find a woman who's angry, she's going to be a lot more vocal about what it is that she wants and her politics and her, all of her
yeah.
interests than a woman who's peaceful. The woman who's peaceful is not a good political, ideological foot soldier. So
No.
that is a whole piece it's been really fascinating to see how much we've been manipulated on kind of that emotional front. And part of that too is the reason it's so effective is that a lot of us do have things that we see as unjust or we've experienced as unjust. And so there was an author I was reading recently, he said it's almost this siren song, like we can't let go of it, this sense of
Yeah.
redressing something and then joining a movement that wants to redress that. Like
Mm.
it's this tractor beam that pulls us in that we can almost like not let go of, that's got a heightened excitement about it and something that's incredibly appealing about it. And so anyway, yeah, I think there's a whole set of layers of things that are going on with women that we don't really even realize how much we've been kind of, just manipulated in that way. And if you look at women's marches, I mean, these are not happy events. There's a lot of
No.
bitterness that comes out in that. And so I think that has to, it's one of those things I think is always should be in the back of our minds is like,
Yeah.
is manipulating me? Is this, and we know this
Yeah.
from watching TV or, hopefully we're sort of aware of the way, like, I mean, how many commercials have we seen where the woman is the one that has to like come in and fix things because the man doesn't know how to change a diaper, he doesn't know how to order
Right.
dinner or make dinner. What if she doesn't make dinner, she's just going to call on the phone,
Yeah.
order on the phone. It's just this sense of women have to always come out looking like the superior
Yeah.
person and have to
Yeah.
sort of like they're just trying to catch up with us kind of thing. So it's all those kinds of subtle ways that have been really really effective in getting women to this stage of kind of this constant angst and irritation.
Yeah, which of course leads to burnout. Like, but so you're saying that it was an intentional, like the governments or the leaders or whatever saw, you know, the mass amount of emotions that a woman experiences, and they intentionally
Yes.
use that against them to kind of drive
Yeah.
humanity kind of apart. Like it's almost like an
Yeah.
evil, like,
Yeah, the first time I identified this was a newspaper called Lucifer, and it was in the
oh,
80s socialist magazine, and it ended up, so that was sort of the first taste of it, and it wasn't until about the 90s that there was a woman who was in charge of the Communist Party, the International Communist Party, and at that point, the feminists and the communists didn't want anything to do with each other because the feminists they thought were too bourgeois. They didn't want them at all. Until this woman realized how angry all these women were. And she said, these are the women we want because they will be the backstop to the revolution that we want to see happen in the
mm,
world. They'll also help get, and actually there was a Congress set up called the Congress for American Women. It was eventually shut down by the House Committee for Un-American Activities. This was before McCarthy in the late 1940s, I think it was shut down. But you had all these amazing, names of women that were involved. The wife of Gumbel's department store was involved. There was
mm,
an ex-wife of a senator. There were all kinds of academic women. Betty Friedan was actually involved in it. There's a lot of evidence about her being very much involved in communist propaganda, and even the feminine mystique was written as a way to get women out of the home. And in that book, she uses an incredible amount of psychology and manipulation, this fear of missing out.
mm,
So yeah, it's pretty well documented that this has been going
yeah.
on for a long time, and it just kept getting worse. And then you throw in the second wave feminism, someone like Kate Millett, who's was certifiably mentally ill, and her arguments would be things like men have destroyed this world, men are killing innocent people in Vietnam, women must be just as strong and kill their own children in the womb.
Oh,
I mean, this kind of
yeah.
vitriol is stirred up over and over and over again. So it's incredibly sad to see how it's been used against us, really, our
Yeah.
own emotions to defeat what it is that I think we really need to be, which is the incredible gift of womanhood, and
Yeah.
being told time and time again that we really won't be fulfilled unless we can mimic what men are doing
Yeah.
in the so that was the
Yeah.
other piece of it too that I think was also really compelling.
Hmm.
And you can see that in the media as well, especially
Yeah.
from once television arrived, you can really see the way women
Yeah. Yeah.
envision.
It's sort of like under the disguise of equality, that I mean that's what they use as a trump card. You are equal. No one said that. Yeah, like I mean, even as you were talking, I mean, it brought me back to Genesis, and it's sort of like, okay, well, so I guess there's a reason that Satan approached Eve and not Adam.
Right.
Like sort of the emotions there and stuff like that, right? It's sort of like,
And you
yeah,
can I think that's a good point because that you can see too the way in which Eve presents this and Adam is willing to go along with it. And
Yeah.
that's been one of the amazing things. It's not been until really recently that you find kind of this equal contempt of woman, like in the
Mhm.
Andrew Tates and the manosphere,
Yeah.
that I've started just calling the masculinists because I think it's both
Mm.
have contempt for the opposite sex. They're kind
True.
of different ends of the pendulum. But what's
Yeah.
amazing to me is that it didn't arise until very recently. I think men have been incredibly patient and
Mhm.
really wanted to support women and try to do whatever they could to make their
Yeah.
wives happy and just didn't, wanted to feel like they were helping and being supportive. And I think more and more people are speaking out and saying this has actually been really damaging to men and we need to be more outspoken and really recognize that trying to make men and women interchangeable isn't actually helping anybody. It's
No.
really havoc on relationships and I'm sure you see this all the time, just the struggle that there, like almost this power struggle that exists in relationships anymore.
100%. It's all
Uh,
about a scorecard.
Yeah. And that's I think one of the fascinating pieces about feminism is it really is about power and control on so many different levels. It can be kind of reduced to that pretty fundamentally. And that's, when you have people who are functioning off of that premise, then you're going to create all of this, drama, particularly in the lives of children who become sort of almost pawns in a way or
Yeah.
accessories. And husbands are really maligned and have lost their sense of purpose too. I think that's another
Yeah. Yeah.
reason women feel like they have to do it all, and men don't know where they fit into the equation anymore.
Right. And okay, so that's sort of the history, like a very
Yeah.
brief and it kind of I appreciate you explaining that because it sort of helps the audience understand what you sort of do. But you also, which is this is like I'm very curious. You said you were married at 35 and it looks like you love what you do. And you have how many children? Five?
Yeah.
Okay. Alrighty then. So how do you do it?
Yeah, I always say I don't do it very well. I mean, I feel like on a lot of levels it's sort of whack-a-mole. But one of the things, and this goes back to our conversation about order and peace. One of the things that our family's gotten to be really vigilant about is Sunday rest. I've
Mm,
done a lot of research into the Sabbath, actually, the Jewish understanding of it. And it's really fascinating. Just there's a beautiful book called The Sabbath by Rabbi Abraham Heschel, and it was written in the 40s. He was a Jew that fled Austria at the beginning of the Second World War, and ended up teaching in the U.S. But it's just a gorgeous book about the Sabbath and this real understanding of as a Christian, I understand church and buildings and space to be a
yeah.
real sacred thing. And for Jews, it's very shifted. It's time. And there's a sacredness about time that starts when the sun goes down on Friday and, ends when the sun goes down on Saturday. And that's really where the sacredness and the restoration comes from. And it's incredibly beautiful because the things they've been doing for thousands of years, like a meal together on
Ex
Friday night,
yeah.
reading, going for walks, taking a nap, I mean, just
Yeah.
really basic human things that don't require a screen. They don't require a,
Right.
a lot of electricity, if any. And so
Yeah.
I think that's been really just something that I've been chewing a lot on lately. But part of it is just recognizing that as a family, we can't be going all the time. There's got to be a downtime. And
Yeah.
so we work hard, really hard, from Sunday night until Saturday evening, and then are really specific and intentional about, we go to mass Sunday morning, but that otherwise I really try to just keep our time protected so that there is this sense of restoration. And I think that makes a really big difference. But it's also just an amazing thing to start conceptually thinking
Oh,
about time being sacred and not just a space. And, if you put those pieces together, um,
yeah.
happens in terms of your understanding of, just our humanity and our relation to God. And Heschel has these beautiful comments about how it's in that Sunday Sabbath, that Sabbath rest, that the seeds of eternity can grow. That there has to be a space in our life where we allow our connection with God and our sense of our immortality to really grow instead of just being stunted by the busyness that we all find ourselves so caught up in.
Yeah, no, that's lovely. I wrote down the title because
That's
I'm not going to give the backdrop about how I was just thinking long and hard about this last week, but yeah, it's the timing is perfect that you brought that up. So, okay, just even like, so I too was breastfeeding when I was doing my PhD and, bringing my youngest with me to class and things like that. So I know what you were talking about when you said, carrying your little infant into the library. So what would be some advice for women that do want it all? Because I think it's important that we say that we don't say, well, you can't. This
yeah.
conversation is about how you cannot have a career. It's like,
No, I think that's right. I think, the thing that's really interesting to me is we're in a space that you can be so much more creative about what you're doing. It's no longer where you have to get the padded shouldered suit and the briefcase and go to work, go
right.
to the office, the way that I
Yeah.
think that everybody felt like that was the vision. And now the internet has changed that. COVID has changed that. I initially was just home with my kids. I was trying to finish my PhD, and I actually worked a lot at night. And
Yeah.
it's fun. One of my daughters she made a totem pole when in her art class, and I was the white moth on it because I was always up late at night under with one light on.
Yeah.
Um, and that's kind of how I got things done. I had this
Yeah.
created this, and I had to be very disciplined about it. I
Mhm.
stopped watching TV. I stopped kind
Oh
of
yeah.
just doing all the extra things. And I think that's a key. But I think that the bigger piece was I didn't try to force it. I wasn't trying. I really felt like I wanted to raise my own children. And
Yeah.
now most of the work that I do, I still do from home. I travel here and there, but it's always time it with my husband's schedule. He takes
Yeah.
time off. We don't have many outsiders coming in on a regular basis because our youngest child is 5. So it's, those are important things at that stage. And I think that has been just a great guiding principle because there are certain things that I would just never consider doing because I knew it would take me, I would have to travel too much or I'd have to be gone too much or we'd have to move.
Yeah.
There are various things. And
Yeah. Yeah.
so it was really just a matter of figuring out what works and prioritizing too. I mean, my husband is incredibly supportive, but he doesn't support me in this just because this is something that I want to do per se. It's because we're a family unit. We have 5 kids. We pay private school tuition
Yeah.
and just can't afford it. I mean,
No.
there's realities that we have to work within and be mindful of. And
Right.
so I think that's the beauty though of the moment in which we live is that it just feels like there's so many different ways in which women can either like put a career on hold or they can do something on the side and
Yeah.
it can develop into something else or they can come back to it. It
Yeah.
just feels like there's a lot more awareness of the realities of motherhood and the importance of it that people are beginning to prioritize. And I think the more that we prioritize, the easier it's going to get for
Exactly.
us to do these kind of creative things.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's doing without things that we realize we don't even miss either. Like you said, when you said I stopped watching TV, I thought, yeah, like I honestly don't remember when the last time I've actually watched TV, right? And I don't mean just because, oh, you can watch everything on an iPad now or whatever. No, I haven't watched TV. Probably you're right, since like, yeah, my kids were babies. It just, yeah, and I don't miss it at all. But what you mentioned there, though, like you and your husband talk and we discussed and you worked as a team. I mean,
Yeah.
that's what's so important.
And I think that's exactly right. That's why it works. And there's not a bitterness or a competition or a sense of, and even when we first had children, I realized I was the one that needed to be up nursing. There was no reason for him to be up all night. Like
Yeah.
it was both of us be miserable and
Yeah.
exhausted. So it was just always kind of one of those things that just very much give and take and communicating about this too. And just saying, there have been certain points where I'm just, I've said, I just simply cannot do this. I need
Yeah.
some space in this area, or we need to stop such and such sport, or
Yeah.
something because I'm, feeling my limits here, and you don't have any more space to add on, and all of those things. So I think that really has been a key is just having somebody that we can have these conversations and just say that this is working or this isn't working. We go out to dinner every few months and just have one of these sort of conversations, like what's not working, what isn't
Right.
working, we haven't been able to talk about at length. And I think that's always just incredibly helpful to feel like we're a team instead of somehow battling each other or trying to outdo each other, or, all the things you hear that I
Oh,
think sadly people bring into their marriage because they have these sort of false expectations about what, family life is supposed to look like.
yeah, exactly. And I wanted to ask you, I thought you would be a good person because I even struggle with this question myself, and because of your background, what is what is healthy and let's say obedience? You know, those
Oh,
two words, those two like it's
yeah.
like
Like, can we even say those words out loud? I know
yeah,
it just hurts, doesn't it?
exactly.
Yeah,
Well,
right. Yeah.
the first, like, it was probably about a year ago that I read the word like obedience. It was in one of C.S. Lewis's books. I think it was Mere Christianity. And like, I almost shut it down. I was like,
Yeah.
what,
What is
what did I just, and shut, it's like, I got to ask somebody, what does this mean? And so,
right? Yeah. No, I love that question. And it's something that I think a lot about because I think all of us, no matter what is going on in our lives, we're sort of in the stage of really recovering from feminism because men have been so shut down in their gifts. In fact, I should send you the name of it. I need to look it up. There was this amazing woman. I have no idea who she was, but my husband showed me this video and she said, we think we don't realize the gift that we have in our husbands. Like she said, she compared them to an umbrella. She was like, it's like carrying a good umbrella and it's raining hard and they're protecting you from all the stuff that can fall on you. But you also have to be strong to be able to hold up that umbrella. Like there's
hmm,
this balancing act. Anyway, I'd never thought of it in those terms. But I think the problem is we've told men they have no job and they have no place and they have no gifts really. We need to do it all. And I think this is the hard thing is that women are incredibly capable. It's not that we're not capable, and I think we've demonstrated that. The key issue is figuring out how do we balance this out so that the family can function in a way it's meant to function, not because there's a power struggle.
yeah,
And I think this is why it's such a hard issue to talk about because we are used to hearing about it as a power struggle. Like I'm not going to submit to him, So and I will say, very frankly, this is something I have had to learn and really struggle with and have conversations with my husband about what are things that I can do that are going to help you feel like you're doing your job to
yeah,
take care of our family and even, getting to the point where you can ask that question, because so many times we will erupt emotionally and it shuts the conversation down and they don't even feel comfortable saying what they really think. And I knew this was happening in my marriage. And so it's one of those things you have to have a long, hard conversations of how can I help you be a better father and husband and not take your job, not trump what you're doing, not try to make my job what your job really is meant to be. So I think
yeah.
that's one way to come at it. The other thing that was really interesting for me coming at it was that I've had a spiritual director most of my adult life. Some I will see pretty regularly just to kind of keep me in check in terms of spiritual life and discerning
Hmm.
different things. And it's been an incredible blessing, but also that experience of being obedient to a spiritual director um, it has made it very easy for me to see where I can let go of things. Like I
Mm.
just don't even need to think about that because, and it's not that the spiritual director is saying you must do this. There was one time when a spiritual director that he told me I had to spend an hour in prayer every day at church, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me because I was single. I
Oh,
had time to do it, and it was
yeah.
just this incredibly transforming period of my life. But to have something, a sense of understanding proper obedience and authority
Hmm.
understand like the freedom that comes from that, that you're not constantly wrestling with everything that comes your way because you can suddenly say, oh, well, I'm not supposed to worry about that. Like that's not on my plate. And I think that that can really be something connected to our understanding of just our relationships with our husband is there are things that are going to fall on his plate that I just don't even need to worry about. And I think that's incredibly another piece of the balance and the peace that comes into it. And, one point this is back to my spiritual director. There was one point, it was actually during COVID, my husband needed to do something for our business and he wasn't doing it. He wasn't doing it. He wasn't doing it. And my spiritual director said, you just need to let him fail. And I just thought, are you kidding me? I just thought it was
Mm.
the craziest advice ever. but it was the best advice because not only did it free him up, like I wasn't nagging him about this thing anymore, but it freed me up. It was better advice for me because I could sort of let go. That was his job. It was one of those things where you just see the order was put back in the way
Yeah.
in which it should be. And I think we have this sense that we have to be controlling all this. And then when we let go, then it's much easier for a man to feel his purpose, what it is that he's meant to do. So
Yeah. No,
it's
that's lovely. That's great advice for other women, I think. I okay, so how would you okay, do you have daughters?
two daughters and three sons.
Okay, so how would you like any kind of advice to raise, daughters to feel proud of being a
Female.
woman? And you know what, I don't think
Yeah.
did we mention that you homeschool? You homeschooled these kids.
Yeah, I'm only homeschooling one child right now. I homeschooled all of them. So I've been homeschooling for about 10 years, and then gratefully we found a really amazing school for our older children to go to. So that's weaning. I'm weaning myself from that. But yeah, no, I think it's funny. My daughters have obviously been hearing about my work for a long time and are familiar with it, and I think it's sort of ingrained in them in a lot of respects. But yeah, my eldest daughter is very much she's a student. She loves to learn. She's a great sponge. She's, really like that's going to be her niche. And I think that's the key is sort of helping our daughters figure out where their interests are and helping them to understand the unique way in which they can come to those interests instead of it being the case that they have to be some sort of, I always felt this way because I was in philosophy that I think other than physics, there's no other program that has fewer women in it than philosophy. And so,
Yeah.
at
Oh,
one point,
interesting.
yeah, at one point I was at the University of Virginia, and it was me and seven young men were in my engineering class, and then I was at
Huh.
Catholic University. Finished and there was mostly men. So I always felt like I had to be in competition with them. And it wasn't until later that I realized that was actually working against me because it wasn't really who I wanted to be. Like I felt like that, it was something I wasn't, but I felt like it was something I had to do because of the feminist ideology
Mm.
around me and the culture. And this is what accomplished women are. They're
Mm,
very
yeah.
and kind of feisty. And so as soon as I let go of that and really realized, my real strength is in thinking deeply about things and not always speaking. I'm not an extrovert. I'm very specific about when I will say things. I don't have to be heard. Like,
Yeah, yeah,
oh,
yeah, yeah,
third
yeah.
daughter, in the family. So I think it was when I realized I could take that pressure off of myself that I didn't have to always have something to say or have a strong opinion about something. It became much easier. And so I probably have taken that approach with my own daughters and they're night and day in both appearance, but also personality wise. And my second daughter loves interior design, incredible eye for it.
Mm.
It's just really fun. She's only 14, but to kind of develop that in her and then think about, not everybody has to go to college. And I have this approach with my sons as well. One of them, um, the 5-year-old, we were just talking about him going to a trade school the other day and how he's going to build me a house, so it's just
Oh,
I think that's really not even just daughters either. It's a question of where do we find and maybe this is some of the problems that we've had in the culture is we're pushing our kids into this very cookie cutter,
yeah.
academic settings that are actually not even edifying to them.
Yeah.
Many times people lose their faith that they come back Marxist and all
Oh,
kinds of ideologies are pushed upon them.
I'm seeing it myself.
Yeah, no, and
Yeah,
it's incredible how powerful it is. And why are we spending all that money to do that? Why not
exactly.
think about these other trades and these amazing things that people can really develop in their lives? They're not therefore, shackled to this huge debt. Really, develop a life of their own creation instead of feeling like they have to kind of go through this adult trade school that costs, you know,
Well,
hundreds of thousands of dollars. And, where does that leave them?
100%. And yeah, not only are these like I said, I'm seeing it myself being brainwashed into certain beliefs that are not in alignment with our own here in the family, but also yeah, the cost. And because it used to be that, I don't know your age, but like I'm 57 and I mean, when I graduated, I mean, a bachelor's degree was pretty like admirable, you know, and now it's like you can barely, I think, you know, it's almost like you need to get a master's.
Yeah, I think that's right. And
And
how
there's
much more money does that cost? The amount of time, all of that. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, you know, having and then delaying, you know, having children and getting on with your life and being a re responsible adult, you know, that much longer as well, right? And it's oh yeah, like it's and the cost, it's just
Yeah.
yeah, I know. I think it's important. I agree with you, Carrie, that we have to start like questioning this ourselves because it's sort of it's an insidious, you know, it's insidious way of sort of again like you slowly adapt. You know, what's that? It's sort of like a frog that's being boiled. Like
The boiled water. Exactly. Yeah.
yeah, it's like you just start to accept it slowly, 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 and you start normalizing it, and then yeah, one day
And
you
that's
wake.
the other thing that has been a really interesting phenomenon to me too, is that there's so many young women that I'm encountering and meeting who just they're not impressed by the girl boss. They don't want that,
Yeah.
the career path and that trajectory and working 80 hours a week. And, that doesn't have the appeal to them. And so it's really interesting to sort of see this break among generations and how what I think my generation, I remember like like the bread and butter. I remember in first grade being told, you can compete with the boys. You're just as good as the boy. Like that was like
Yeah.
the engine behind all the things we did was we just have to compete with the boys. So to kind of get to a space where, you actually can see, well, maybe there's another set of values that women ought to embody. And I think this is a really important piece. If you look back at the last 50 years, where is anybody talking about the beauty and goodness and giftedness of motherhood? And I think that that's part of our confusion is it's not just motherhood isn't meant to be just a gift for biological mothers. All women are really meant to embody it, whether it's mentally, psychologically, mentoring people, spiritually,
Yes.
people become better people. I know that
Mm.
this is something that can be expressed in the workplace, it can be expressed on the sports field. We're drawn to those women that we feel like are not trying to manipulate us, that we feel like are really interested in our best interest and that want to help us grow into something better. Those are the things that we're drawn to. And so why are we not helping women understand that's their role? That's the beautiful gift and
Yeah.
have to offer anywhere, whether it is in the home, in the workplace, instead of this constant jealousy and bitterness and,
Yeah.
moving up the corporate ladder, all of that. I think that's really what feels like the responsibility that we have now is to help just talk about the beauty of motherhood and it's, the big picture again, not just the biological in a way that's healthy and ordered. Because if you look at feminism, this is what they targeted was motherhood. The language is very clear. It's all drudgery. And I'm not saying it wasn't hard. And I'm not saying motherhood isn't hard.
Oh,
But if you're only going to be portraying it as either mother or as drudgery or even that like devouring mother, this is one of the things you saw.
yeah. That too.
Second wave feminism is kind of this articulation of like, oh, you're codependent, you've got hangups, just kind of
Right.
the twisting of it. But if
Yeah.
we go back to really understanding, even thinking in our own lives, like who are the women that I really am inspired by and is there a commonality in their traits and thinking about that can inform our own lives in terms of what it is that we're called to do and the ways in which we're meant to help those around us.
Yeah. I mean, when you say that, values and characteristics, like the first thing that comes to mind is humility. You know, it's hard to find a humble person out there. And sacrifice, you know, like
Right.
and
Yeah.
that's what motherhood is.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's what I think there's something incredibly beautiful and compelling about that. And that's what I feel like we've got to start. This is part of the mission of Theology of Home. We have to start giving people sort of a mental image of that because that's when you don't find it really anywhere
No.
in the culture. We've got to start sort of like filling that box up for people to see. Okay, there's somewhere in between like the girl boss and the doormat. There's something healthy in the
Exactly.
middle that can understand who she is and what her purpose is and kind of have that really strong sense of core and identity, but who also has a sense of mission and the sacrifice for that mission, no matter what it is. And that, it doesn't mean that she has to do one or the other, that those things can be, all of those things can kind of work in tandem together when that's really the real call. So,
Right, right. I mean, I think that you're just speaking towards balance there when you said, like doormat versus what was the term you used?
girl boss. I use girl
Yeah,
boss.
exactly. Yeah. Um, and that's like harmony. That's balance, and that's one of the most difficult things for people to achieve in life, right? No matter what
It
it is.
requires it requires complex thinking. I think that,
Exactly.
even Aristotle said the human brain likes extremes, one or the other.
Yeah.
He was the big advocate for the middle, and it's hard to think about the middle. It's hard to get there, and especially if you have zero models of someone in the middle.
Yeah.
So I think
Yeah.
that's the
Yeah.
is model.
It's, you see it everywhere in life too. It's like even like actually after this, I'm interviewing a couple that work together, but they're anyway, it's sort of one way of eating. And so like even in nutrition, right? You have the carnivores and then you have the vegans. And
Yeah,
both think each other are evil. It's it's yeah, no, being in the middle, like maybe you want to call it Mediterranean or whatever, is the most like peaceful, calming, I mean, way of going, I think. But you're right. And I think the more chaotic our world becomes, the more busy, the more frenetic it becomes, the more we lean towards those black and white things, right? Because everything in our daily lives is so crazy that, okay, I want to simplify my life. So all I'm going to wear is maybe black clothes and I'm just going to be a
right.
carnivore. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
You know?
And just keep it simple psychologically, and you just have kind of these mental guardrails that are supposed to make it easy. But
Yeah.
that's a great point. Yeah.
That's not the way to live.
Yeah, no, I think,
No.
and I guess that's again, just even the beauty of Sabbath rest is that's there so that the frenetic pace is a place to stop, so that you can have that balance and you can see the pendulums, on and swing the opposite direction and kind of be in a peaceful space.
No, I'm so glad you brought that up. I mean, I think that was like a sign from above that you actually brought that up as well today. But I know because when I think about myself, like I grew up in a small Catholic community, very, very small. And my memories of Sunday were, yeah, dressing up nice, going to church, singing in the choir, which I'm so thankful for. I still have such good memory of that. And then everybody comes out of church, everybody visits in the small farming community, like we're all visiting, kids are running about, and then in the afternoons, I remember my mom and dad often having visitors over or
Yeah,
visiting another couple,
right.
right? And that was it. And, but you're right, the other 6 days, nose
Everyone's
to the floor,
yeah,
like
yeah.
work, work, work. Yeah. So, yeah. Okay, well, I know we're coming to our time. I want to just ask you like maybe a few rapid fire questions. Maybe, we can end it like this and just sort of whatever comes to mind. One thing, and you might have said it, one thing every woman should start doing.
Yeah, certainly. I think carving out Sabbath time, I think, is
Yeah.
probably just so simple, so easy. Daily prayer, I think, is important too, even if you just
Yeah.
start with 15 minutes somewhere built in. And that's every day at like a certain set time, I
Mm,
think, because otherwise it's too easy to fudge.
exactly. I mean, and I've thankfully found that myself too. I was one. I mean, I am like the poster child for what you shouldn't be doing. Like in back in my 40s, like, get up early before the kids get up, run, 45 minutes every morning, like beat myself down. And then the chaos began. And yeah, I'm not gonna even, but now it's like I get up and I pray, and it's 20 minutes
Right.
of stretching and strength
Yeah,
training. Yeah.
right.
So, well, yeah, one thing every woman should stop doing today.
Complaining. I think it's a game changer when you stop complaining. And it's a game changer when you start realizing how much you complain.
Yeah.
Well, this because speaking of poster children, it's fall into it so easily. But I think it makes all the difference because then then gratitude has a capacity to seek in, and your emotions
Exactly.
aren't constantly all over the place. You're not swinging from bitterness and anger to trying to engage your children in a healthy way. Just things can become steadier.
Right. Yeah. Like a simple thing that I've been saying lately on some episodes is just sort of whether it's your child or your spouse and you walk Like I have a home office as well. You walk out, you see them, you're not saying, what did you do today, but how are you today? Or how's your day going? Just like instead of
Right.
what, replacing it with how.
That's a great thing. Yeah.
Yeah,
Pull
just
more out instead of it just being one word answer. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So okay, and I want to thank you so much because you've given me so many little golden nuggets today. But one thing I always wondered about, and now you answered it for me, is that like for some reason I thought like feminism was something, kind of more recent, like more
Mhm.
70s or East or something like that. And I thought, how did I become such a strong-willed, stubborn, independent woman? And like I'm thinking, I'm kind of old. How did I become that way? But like you just told me, it's been since the 1800s that like it's been sort of slowly weaving into our society. Yeah.
That's, that's it.
So so
We've got a lot of work to do, but it's actually healthy, building, enriching, all the things that women loves. It builds our relationships. And that's, I think, just the real hope and beauty of it. It's, we're not trying to destroy people, we're trying to build them up. And that's really where our ultimate happiness comes from, is in these rich relationships. And so it's kind of exciting mission to have.
wonderful. Yeah. And I just thought of one more thing. Do you have any recommendations on like how about if women want to be joining like-minded women, like do you yourself belong to a community of women out there where you seek support or
Well, I mean, obviously practicing the faith, there's Catholic, that's a natural fit. My own blog has become kind of a site for a lot of women. We post 8 articles Monday through Friday each day that it's sort of like a magazine for women. We have a lot of women who are kind of adulting through it. It's everything from cooking tips to travel to theological articles to more things that are more thought pieces and interwoven with a lot of really beautiful and tender stories as well. So that's
I
what we
took
put
a
together.
yeah, I took a look at that yesterday. It's funny you said that. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's been a really fun thing because I think a lot of women, it's helping them kind of recast the model of womanhood in their minds, but in a way that's fun. And I think that's
Yeah.
one of the things that we've really left out of womanhood, in trying to think of it in good, positive terms, is women really appreciate something that's fun, that's engaging, that can just add some pop to their life and something interesting. And
Yeah.
that's an important piece of it. So that's what we've built. We have a Substack also, but yeah, by
Hmm.
and large, I think it's there's a lot of things that are growing, and I think a lot of people are beginning to start rethinking this, and so hopefully within the coming years, there's going to be a lot more of it. But yeah, it's hard, I think, to help people carve out a niche, but they're growing these communities.
Yeah. Okay, so and just to be clear for the audience too, you have a book as well as an online magazine? Or
Yeah, so there's 4 books called Theology of Home, 1 through 4. They're all about
okay.
different aspects. The first one's really about the home. The second one is called The Spiritual Art of Homemaking. The
Mm.
third is about the ocean and just the beauty of that related to womanhood. And then the fourth one is about flowers and the liturgical year and seasons connected to flowers. And it's just stunning. We didn't write that
Oh,
one. Our Emily Malloy, who wrote and shot that and grew all the flowers for it. And then we have this blog that runs Monday through Friday that has, people get their box every morning. Just some things, we want people to leave our site feeling edified and restored instead of, in desperation or frustration. I think we
yeah.
find in so many other sites. So that's really the goal, is to just build people up and help them have a place where they can get content and news that is really edifying and coming. And they can also read while their 9-year-old son is behind them. They're not clicking on crazy things. That's the
Well,
goal.
I'm definitely going to be ordering your books through our local bookstore for sure. It sounds wonderful.
And the first one in particular you're gonna like because it's we have all those elements of home. It's not how to decorate your home, but why we want to decorate our home. So it uses things like order, hospitality,
Yes.
nourishment, lighting, all those things are really important aspects of the home, but also we find them in a church and we find them in heaven. Kind of
Yeah.
how do we bring those elements into our homes? So
Well, I think what you've done is just sort of given me the answer for when women come into my office and say, how do I find peace? I just want peace.
there you go.
Perfect.
It's all in a book. We've already written it. So
Yeah, yeah.
thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Carrie. Thank you for the work you're doing. And everyone else, have a great rest of your week. Bye. Thanks for tuning in to this episode. Remember that you can watch the full episode on YouTube, where I plan to hang out the most. Your feedback and suggestions for future guests are incredibly valuable to me, so please don't hesitate to post a comment. You are an integral part of this journey.